Hi, I'm James Gill with Gill Nursery. We're going to talk a little bit today about pruning, early spring pruning. We had quite a freeze this year, so there's going to be a lot of damage. Most of the plants are actually still alive. And I'm going to talk first about pruning tools. A good pair of hand pruning clippers is very important, and it's also important that they be sharp. So you ought to have a stone or a file, and then one edge is beveled, only one. This is an anvil, you never sharpen it. This edge is flat, you never sharpen it. You only sharpen this one edge right here. And act like you're trying to slice a thin slice off of that stone. And by having nice sharp shears, you'll have good clean cuts. And you'll avoid one of the biggest problems people have with pruning and their pruning tools. If it's too dull, they cut, they only get part way through, and then they start wiggling their shears to try to make that branch fall off. And when you cause these two blades to splay apart, they'll never work again. So sharp shears, cut through in a straight line, just straight line. Hand pruners. Loppers for bigger branches. Head shears for going after lots of bush at one time. In this case, you have two edges to sharpen. One on this blade and one on this blade. Okay, one more thing we'll talk about real quick is if you're pruning oleanders, there is a disease on oleanders called oleander blight. You don't want to spread it from one plant to the next. It is typically vectored by an insect that will bite an infected plant and then a healthy one, transferring the disease. You can do the same thing with tools. So you may want to mix 1 part bleach and 9 parts water and dip your shears between plants so you don't spread that disease. Let's go on over to the shrubs. Okay, now we're going to start pruning. This is a knockout rose. It's a hardy shrub. You can see it's still got plenty of green foliage on it. It really hasn't been damaged by the cold at all. It is looking winter worn, but it's not damaged. But to stimulate healthy, fresh new growth in abundance and a nice full plant, we're going to want to prune this back. And you may want to do that on a lot of your hardier plants just to control the size if they're getting bigger than you want. So we're selecting loppers. We're going to go in about 1/3 to 1/2 of the way down and just take branches off. You can do this with hand pruners. You can even do this with head shears, but loppers is going to be the most efficient tool for doing this type of work. So, where we've made all these cuts, we're going to get multiple new tips of growth, plus we'll get some new growth from further down on the stem. We'll get a healthier, thicker, fuller plant, and more blooms, more tips. Okay, now we're looking at a half-hardy shrub. It was a little bit more damaged by the cold, not that much. If you're farther out from the bay, yours may show quite a bit more damage. This is called a dry Alice or a yellow Plumbago. And it's starting out too high. We want to lower it. We want to remove this damaged old foliage. And then let me show you something else. Take a look down here inside. You see how you've got lots of healthy, vigorous, dark green new sprouts? That's what we're trying to stimulate, and the plant is already trying to give it a try, but it's going to do it much better if we do this trimming back. So, once again, I'm going to head in there with my loppers. I'm going to remove about half of this plant, and we're going to get much stronger, healthier, more floriferous new growth by doing this. Cutting back. Doesn't look like much when you're finished, but that is going to be a gorgeous plant in a month from now. Whereas it would be kind of overgrown, kind of thin and spindly, too tall, and with not so much healthy looking foliage if we did not cut it back at this time. Okay, now we're looking at another totally hardy shrub. This is Indian Hawthorn. Was not damaged by the freeze, cannot be damaged by the freeze. Should not be pruned now because this is an early spring bloomer. And so what you want to do is let it bloom on out. Enjoy that color. It'll last for about 2-3 weeks. As soon as most of the blooms have faded, don't wait for every single bloom. As soon as most of the blooms have faded, come in here with head shears and give a very light trimming. Maybe just take 2 inches off. You see these little berries, all those flower buds will turn into berries if you don't prune. And these berries, well, they're not bad, but they don't do us any good. And by pruning the flowers off, we won't get the berries, and all the energy that makes these berries will instead go into new tips, new leaves, new foliage, and new flowers the next year. So that's why we like to prune them, but not until after flowering. So with some of these damaged leaves, we're going to want to remove this. You can either take it all the way down to the ground, or you can selectively take some of these oldest branches out. It won't look good when you're done, but it'll make room for that healthy new growth that is down in here, and there's no way you're going to be able to see it yet. That new growth will come on out and will be your new tips instead of this ugly older foliage. So just remove substantial sized branches, toss them off. You'll end up with kind of a raggedy bundle of sticks, but there'll be some nice looking growth down in there. Pretty soon it'll come on out. Okay, this is Hamelia or firebush. It's a tropical and it is severely damaged. Let me see if I can give you an example here. This bark is split wide open. I mean, it's gone. It's dead. And so what we would typically do is move down the plant a little bit at a time, scratching until we find green. But I can tell you, I didn't bring the right tool for this. I'm going to need a saw, because as I scratch, I don't find green until I get right down to the ground. And that's okay. This plant's going to need to be cut off all the way at the ground, and then it'll come back from there. Okay, this is a perennial salvia, which I'm sure most of you guys have got some sort of perennial in your yard. And the plant is hardy, but it's meaning it does not freeze dead. It's not a tropical, but it does typically allow the top to die during the wintertime. And so it needs a severe cutting back. All these old dead bloom stalks just need to come out of there. And you see how you've got some new healthy tips arising from the ground. This will be a great plant again in 1 month from now, but it needs that old material taken away. This one's Mexican bush sage. We'll move on to another tropical, Lantana. Okay, so this is Lantana. It's another perennial. It does tend to freeze down quite a bit further if you have a hard freeze like this. But even if it didn't, even in those mild years, it's going to come back much better if it's pruned severely. So you're going to take that plant down to where it's got pretty much zero foliage left. Just this little structure is all that's left, and it'll come on out and make a great, beautiful plant. Okay, and so here we have a Laurel Pendulum, also known as fringe flower. There's the fringy flower. And not damaged by the freeze, comes from the Himalayan mountains. But as you can see, it's starting to get a little lanky and awkward. So we're just going to do the tiniest bit of touch-up pruning on this plant. And that'll give it a more even form. We want to allow it to have still a natural open shape, but not quite as much awkwardness as it has. And that's all it takes. Just a little bit of trimming. Okay, so we've looked at some hardy plants, that is non-freezing, half hardy, that are a little damaged but mostly okay. We've looked at some perennials that always need to be cut back even if they don't freeze. We've looked at some tropicals that are severely damaged but still alive down at the bottom. And how many more plants are there? There are hundreds and hundreds of more plants that I can't show you all of them. So just be sure to call us here at Gill Nursery, either location, and we'd be happy to talk to you about whatever individual plant you may have that has not been covered and you still have questions about. Thanks for listening.